Welcome, everybody, to the Beards and Bible podcast, a very special edition of the Beards and Bible podcast, I might add. For this particular episode is episode 100. Episode 100.
That's wild, man.
Isn't it crazy? Does it feel like we've been doing this for 4 years?
No, it honestly doesn't. And I feel like I don't. My proficiency at this is not on an equivalent level of where it should be after 4 years.
Well, here's the thing. You and I both are pastors, pastoring congregations that are growing, and we're both dads of 3 children. Yours is about to be 4 children, and you work a full-time job on top of pastoring. So the fact that we've been able to keep this thing going for 4 years, I think we deserve at least a gold star or something. I don't know.
Yeah. What are the stats, I wonder, and how long podcast lasts on average?
I don't know. I don't know. Maybe we're feeling all sorts of pride on this, and then turns out that we have no reason to. I do know, because we started ours during COVID lockdown. There was nothing else to do, and so we were like, man, why don't we just hang out via Zoom and start recording the conversations? And then it just kept going. So I think there's a lot of podcasts that got started during COVID lockdown and didn't make it out of COVID lockdown. But I can't quit you.
I got my 100th episode. Wait, that wasn't a Brokeback on Beards in the Bible. I don't know what's worse, the fact that you made that reference with that.
Yeah, I don't know.
This is my drop it like
a sloth. Nice. Yeah, that's good. That's awesome.
My coffee mug here. My
tea
mug.
Yeah.
So how are you doing? How you been?
I'm good, man. Good. We had our Resurrection Weekend services this past weekend, and it was very full, but very good. So I'm recovering from that. But
cool.
Yeah, so far so good. How about you guys?
Really good. Really good. Yeah, just awaiting the arrival of number 4, baby.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's going to be a boy.
Nice.
And we're kicking around. We've narrowed it down to, I think, 3 names.
Okay.
And we are horrible enough at just picking out paint colors for the walls of our house, let alone what we're going to call our child the rest of his life. So we've narrowed down to 3 names, and I need to ask your permission.
Okay.
Because my boys, the number 1 name that they want to name the new little brother is Judah.
How did I know you were going to say that?
So I'm like, you know what? I need to hear it from Josh's mouth.
Listen,
do we have your blessing, or if we just completely rip off the name of one of your children?
Listen, so about 2 days ago, my Judah, who's 3, decided he didn't like his name, and now he wants to be called Ryder. And so he's not answering to his name right now. So we'll be like, hey, Judah, come here. And he's like, I'm not Judah. I'm Ryder. Like Ryder from Paw Patrol, you know?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so he's just decided that he doesn't like his name anymore, and his name is now Ryder, not Judah. So, I mean, as far as I know, we don't have a Judah in our house. So that name is up for grabs completely because he doesn't like it anymore. So, but it's a good name.
One of the 3. Yeah, it is a good, strong name. We're looking at Judah. Yeah. I like Jonah. And Stacy really likes Asher.
Yeah.
So,
all 3 of those are good names.
I don't know. I feel like Stacy gets more sway in the discussion because she's growing this human being in her body for 9 months, and then she's going to grow this human being via nursing it probably for, I don't know, the first however long of its life.
Yeah. I knew that his name was our baby. I knew his name was going to be Judah because I was reading in my Bible one morning, and it talked about Judah being born, and then it said of Judah's mom, and then her childbearing days were over. And I was like, yeah, okay. That's our youngest. No more kids. He's good. So if that's where you guys are, or you're like, our childbearing days are over, then Judah would be a good bookend to the Rutledge clan.
Little closure. Yeah,
man. Yeah. Well, that's exciting. Yeah, and you guys can use Judah. I think Judah's an awesome name. So there needs to be more Judahs in the world. So
I feel like your Judah's kind of giving you a run for your parental money. Is that
100%? Absolutely. What? That's probably why I was like, "Hey, yeah, go for it, man. You can if you get a Judah like our Judah, then you're gonna have your hands full." But I think it's just a really. I think it's probably gonna be a trending name because we named our son Aiden, our oldest. He was born in 2015, and out here in Cannon County, there's not that many Aidens because out here, all the boy boy names are like Briar or Jackson, Blackston, Fraxton, Maxton,
Gunner.
Staxton, Gunner,
yeah,
Reming. Well, I was gonna say Remington, but that's actually there's Remington Steel, that's a cool name. But yeah, so we don't know too many Aidens, and then we'll go to Franklin or Murfreesboro, where it's a lot of middle to upper class white people, and you say the name Aiden, and 10 kids turn around and are like, yes,
that's hilarious.
So yeah, it's funny.
Right.
But
I met a family here in Southern Alabama. They had a son named Ariat, and I was like, Ariat, and they're like, yeah, like the boot brand, and I was like, oh wow, that's a whole other level that you've named a kid after a cowboy boot brand.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Aiden went to preschool with a kid named Briar. So that's one, And then I feel like girl baby names out where we live, you just take a one-syllable word and you add Lee to the end. So it could be Tenley, Fanley, Lampley, Scanley, Manley. That's one. Or Lynn, like Lakeland.
Yeah.
Or Brandlin.
I remember when I taught school, I had a girl named Anna Lee as a student. And man, the first time I just said her name is Anna, it was like I committed one of the 7 deadly sins. She's like, Mr. Rutledge, it's Anna Lee. Like that. It was 2 separate words, right? It was
yeah.
And then capital L-E-E, like 2 separate things. It's like, wow. Anna. And she's like, you mean Anna Lee? Oh, wow. Okay.
I'm sorry. I didn't know your name was an adverb. Yeah. Well, I think but naming your kid is a very personal thing, and I don't want to Jesus juke it, but I think God does give us the name for our kids. And it seems to us, at least, that our kids have lived up to their names, and we can't imagine them being named anything else. And I really hope that Judah decides to have his name back after he's done with Paw Patrol, and he doesn't want to be called Ryder anymore. But yeah. So 100 episodes, Gabe.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this: what has been the most surprising thing about this little podcast that's still going?
People, other than that, people listen to it from time to time.
Yes, that's been the biggest.
The most surprising thing. Wow. Yeah, I'd have to say just the amount of people that have listened and given me feedback and just people that I know, people that I don't know will message me or come up to me in person and say, hey, I really liked that episode on this particular topic. And I'm like, oh, wow, that's really honoring that you listened to it. Thank you.
Yeah.
So, yeah, just surprising, I guess, to me that we would put out content that many people would find interesting. It's really cool and humbling. Yeah. What about for you?
No, same thing, man. I never thought that we would get even 50 weekly listeners. That seemed a stretch, that people would want to just be in the room where you and I were hanging out and chatting. But
yeah,
I don't know. I think I've also been surprised at how many people have stepped in to interact with the podcast and sent emails and messages and suggested topics. And it's really cool. I always kind of envisioned that that's the way that this thing would turn out. We would sometimes come up with topics to talk about, but then other people would kind of be the ones, as they interacted with it, that would steer the direction of where it is we're going with it. So that's been the most surprising thing about it. What's been the hardest thing about it so far?
I mean, honestly, just carving, and it sounds bad, but like you mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, it's like we're busy and setting time apart to, like today you sent me show notes and I'm sitting in my truck, at work, watching the drywall guys do their thing, and I'm going through our show notes and studying the Hebrew word for proud and pride.
I really hope your boss isn't listening to this.
No, they don't care. But no, it's just I'm trying to be keeping all these kind of things spinning up in the air, like just juggling all of that and thinking, man, am I doing a good job and being a good steward of it all? And that's been the hardest thing. But I mean, other than that, it's been a lot of fun and really cool. What's been your favorite episode we've done?
Ooh, that's a good question. Man, I think I really liked the deconstruction series that we did about a year ago. Only because that had been a topic that had been brewing and bubbling from conversations I've had with people for a couple of years. And I think it was the same for you too. Like we kept we would have an episode about something else and then we'd bring in deconstruction. And then it almost just seemed like we were like, we've got to do a series on this and do a deep dive on what this is and why this is trending and stuff like that. And so when we did it, man, it just kind of seemed like that's exactly what we needed to do at the time, because so many people connected with me and just said, hey, listen, thank you so much for speaking to it. Even people that are currently deconstructing said, hey, thank you. It was helpful just to get a different perspective on it. And I don't know. That was probably that whole series. I really enjoyed being able to sit down with my buddy Jesse, who had deconstructed, and just kind of hearing his side of why he'd gone down that road and talking with him about it. I think that was I don't know, that really meant a lot to me that I got a chance to do that. So how about you? What's been your favorite episode?
Well, I was just going to say, like, that's a neat kind of component of the podcast, is that we kind of are doing our best to keep our finger on the pulse of what people are inquisitive about, the trends that are happening online or different things. And we can kind of hear those and get questions and feedback from people. And I think that's kind of the role of a pastor in general, is just to like know what's going on with the flock that they're shepherding. Yeah. And in a sense, we're kind of like keeping a lookout and kind of aware of what's going on with the broader body of Messiah and different things that are happening in that realm. And we can kind of speak to those. But my favorite episode, man, I've always really enjoyed when we did the flat Earth conspiracy. I don't know, that we was so
hammered for that one recently.
You're saying we got hammered by people writing in about it?
Send us some hate mail. That was fun. Say again?
Oh, you're saying we got hammered by negative feedback on that?
Oh, recently, yeah. I think I sent it to you. Somebody was not happy about us.
Oh, yeah.
Saying the Earth was not flat. So,
yeah. I just really like getting into the minds of people that believe the Earth is flat and trying to figure out why. Like why. And so, yeah, it's just kind of picking people's brains like that and learning about it. So the fact that we got to geek out over that for about an hour was really cool. And it was interesting.
I was probably not as compassionate in the episode as I probably needed to be. So forgive me. Forgive me. If you go back and listen and you're like, man, Josh is a jerk on that episode. Yeah. Yeah, I was probably not as compassionate as I needed to be with it. But
anyway. I don't remember.
Well, our recent fan mail concerning that episode was quite telling. So,
yeah.
Oh man. Well, since it is episode 100, we are going to be cracking open the inbox and taking a look at some awesome questions tonight, sent in by you, the listener, or the viewer, whichever way you consume this podcast. So our first question tonight is from a listener named Sam. And she writes, hi, Pastor Josh and Gabe. Rabbi Gabe? Pastor Gabe? Gaby baby?
Yeah.
Is it Gaby baby?
Yes, please. That's henceforth my title.
Baby. We used to call you Gabby in college. Gabby.
That's right.
Yeah. Anyway, Gabby. I was wondering if you could address the topic of pride. If it can ever be good, or if its presence will always steal glory from God. If things like national pride, or even the pride of a job well done, can honor God, and how? Or maybe it's just vernacular, national pride versus gratitude for the blessings one receives from their citizenship, a job well done, praising the Creator for his gifts of ability and insight rather than a sense of pride. And she goes on a little bit more about that, but I thought that was a really good question, speaking to the issue of pride and, if it's always a negative thing, or can we ever say as Christians, hey, I'm proud that I did that, or I'm proud of that, or I'm proud of my kid? So
Yeah,
there you
that's a
go.
good question.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we're going to bring it back to the Bible, I guess, because the Bible has lots and lots to say about pride. And every instance the Bible brings up pride, it's always in a negative connotation. That pride is not good. What pride comes before the fall, that kind of stuff. It just seems like pride is. But then, yeah, it's like, man, well, I did a good job mowing the lawn. Should I take pride in that? Or I built a house. Should I take pride in that? Or should I take pride in the things that I do, or how I work? And I think what's happened is kind of this is loss of understanding and translation, because when you dig into the original language of the Bible and you look at the word pride, it means something entirely different than if we look at our English concept of pride. So, for instance, the Hebrew word pride is the word zood. Zood. And
Yeah, there's a good baby name.
Yeah. Or it's
Zood
often used.
Rutledge. Zood the
Yeah,
dude.
it's zood. Or zadon is another, is kind of a cognate of that. But for instance, like if you look at Genesis 25, verse 29, zooding is what Jacob was doing with a pot of stew as Esau was coming in from the field. And it says, and Jacob zooded a pot of stew. And it's what did he do? He boiled stew. It's picture this pot, the simmering pot. It is the idea of boiling the contents of a pot, boiling over its edges.
Interesting.
Like, have you ever made like oatmeal or rice or cream of wheat or grits? It's like if you forget to turn it down to simmer and it's still on high, even after you poured all the stuff, what happens is it like boils over, right? And then it gets all in the burner and it stinks and it gets all smoky. But that's the idea, a biblical idea of pride. To zood, it means to boil over. It's expanded upon and built upon later when you get to Deuteronomy chapter 18, verse 20. That's the verse warning the people of Israel about a false prophet. And it says, but if a prophet comes and he's speaking in a zood way, as if he has a word from me, which I haven't given him, or who speaks in the name of other gods other than me, he shall die. So the concept of biblical pride, the biblical concept of pride, is someone who is literally boiling outside of where they should be. They're rising above the space that their presence should consume.
Interesting.
Which is kind of the opposite of humility. Humility is oftentimes we think, oh, humility, you're constantly self-deprecating, or you're like constantly not accepting any kind of like compliments from other people,
right?
Or you're tearing yourself down. That's not humility. Humility is just is operating and filling the proper amount of space at the proper time that you deserve, basically, that you have earned. And someone speaking in pride or acting in pride is someone who is boiling outside of that and saying, I'm something that I'm really not. Or I'm speaking on behalf of someone when I'm really not.
Yeah. So when we think about like the origin of pride in the Bible, and we think about Lucifer, that fits that description to a T, because Lucifer was given a really important job as an angel, as a high-ranking angel. But what Lucifer did is exactly that. He got outside the boundaries of what's proper, and he considered himself more than what he actually was, and wanted to steal glory from God, which caused him to be cast out of heaven.
It's acting like presumptuous.
And essentially it was.
Yeah.
That's so interesting.
Yeah. And actually, if you look at the King James Version of Genesis 25:29, they don't really know how to translate this Hebrew word zood. So they actually transliterate it into English, and it says in verse 29 in the King James Version, and Jacob sowed pottage. It uses like SOD or sod, because it doesn't really know how to translate it, but it's he boiled pottage. But that's the biblical Hebrew word for pride, is to boil over one's edges.
That's so interesting.
I think Sam, to answer your question, I think it's good, and that English sense of the word to take pride in what you do, or like the Lee Greenwood song,
I'm
"Proud to be an
proud.
American."
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's okay. I think as long as you do it in a way that is fulfilling the proper space at the proper time.
Yeah.
I painted this picture. I'm proud of it. That's good.
Yeah.
That's what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to do everything as unto God. But now when we boil over our edges and we act presumptuously or arrogantly, then we're getting into a place of sin, a place
Mm-hmm.
that is coming before the fall, we should say.
That is a fantastic description of that. I think that's really, really helpful. Gabe, I'm going to turn on low data mode for our recording just because you're lagging a little bit on my end. It'll still record
Right.
video, but just so we know. Um, so that's a little different than what we read of like in 2 Corinthians 7:4, when Paul says to the Corinthians, I have spoken to you with great frankness. I take great pride in you.
Mm-hmm.
I'm greatly encouraged in all our troubles. My joy knows no bounds, right? So, like, in that sense, that's not Paul bubbling over
Right.
inappropriately saying, I'm going to take credit for something I didn't do, or I'm going to exalt myself in a way that is making much of me. I mean, it's just saying, like, hey, listen, I'm proud of you guys. Like, I take pride in you, right? And I thought of another verse too, Galatians 6:4. Paul says each one should test their own actions, and they can take pride in themselves alone without comparing themselves to someone else. That's one translation of Galatians 6:4. But the thrust of Galatians 6:4 is essentially, hey, you're going to have to bear your own load. So you should test your own actions, and you can take pride in yourselves alone. Like, don't compare yourself to other people. Look at your life. Look at what you're doing. Look at the burdens that you're going to carry, and then you can take like this pride in the work that you've done when you stand before the judgment seat, right? So it's not like a ego or a self-exaltation. It's like a healthy sense of self-assessment and satisfaction in saying, listen, I've fulfilled my responsibilities as a Christian, and I've fulfilled my calling, and I can take pride in that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, this is kind of putting you on the spot, but I mean, is there ever a moment as a pastor when you like look at the congregation that God's called you to shepherd, and you just say, man, I'm proud of this. I'm proud of this work that God's called me to do.
Yeah. I mean, like last night we had like worship practice at it. It's like in the evenings every Wednesday night we have worship practice. I'm sitting there looking across, and I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 or 5 teenagers who are like 15 to 17 years old, who learned a talent, learned to play a musical instrument so that they could play on the worship team. And they play this musical instrument very well. And it's just like, man, that gives me immense pride to look at this and say, this is so cool. Like, these kids are just operating in their gift and calling, and I could just see God working in their life, and that brings me immense pride, and that's not sinful. That just
no.
Yeah.
How about like from the work that you've done? Like, is there something you've done in ministry where you've just been like, man, I'm proud of that. Like, I think I did that well. I think I fulfilled my responsibility and calling in that moment.
It's hard because I'm very critical of myself, and
yeah, me too.
I don't do enough of that, like maybe positively journaling or something where I go back and look at successes or, I mean, it's a hard question for me to answer. I know I have had successes in terms of leadership and shepherding. But I just, I don't know, man. I'm just always very critical of myself, and I don't.
Yeah, me too.
It's tough. Yeah. But what about you though? I mean, like, have you,
I
would say you have a great reason to be proud of what you've accomplished and what you've done. And it's hard because like Sam says, you don't want to steal glory from God. It's like, I feel so unqualified to do what I do.
Yeah. I mean, like, that's a tough one for me too, because like, I was always taught that, in one sense, we're all turtles on a stump. You ever heard this analogy?
Yeah. Turtles on a fence post. Yeah.
Yeah. If you see a turtle on a fence post, you can be sure it never got there by itself.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So when I look back on, 14 years in full-time ministry, or 10 years of full-time ministry, 14 years in bivocational, like, I didn't Like there's been so many people that God's put in my life that brought me to the place I'm at.
Mm-hmm.
So in one sense, like I'm a turtle on a fence post. Like I didn't get myself here. God's grace and God's mercy and God's spirit empowering me, and then all these other people that God put in my life, they're the ones that got me to the place I'm at. So in that sense, like I can't boast in any of that. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I'm that's exactly, I'm kind of like speechless when you ask me that question. I'm like, I don't know,
Yeah.
because I take immense pride in the fact that I've been able to be a vehicle of
Sure.
God's,
Yeah.
but even then I'm always, I feel like I'm Balaam's ass, I'm just kind of like this,
I've always called you that too. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah. Like
Yeah.
that's kind of my role in the story, is I'm just
Yeah.
the talking ass,
A
He's like,
memoir by Gabe Rutledge.
Yeah.
Well, I think though, in the same sense, like I'm very hesitant to boast and say, "Wow, I've done all this," because I know I haven't. It's been the Lord, and it's been the people He's brought around me. But there is a way in which I can look back on 10 years of ministry and say, "Hey, up to this point, I feel like I've run my race pretty good up to this point."
Mm-hmm.
I've not been perfect. Like I've certainly made my fair share of mistakes, and I've certainly, made my fair share of blunders and sins. So I'm not saying that, but I do think that I can say, man, I think I've worked hard. Is that fair?
Yeah.
I don't think it's
Yeah.
boastful.
No,
I
that's
hope
not
it's
boastful at
not.
all. Well, I think too, like you and I could probably stop and think about for a second. Like there's probably family trees that have changed for at least the next few generations because of the fact that we've just been faithful in the small things. Like we haven't done these like great momentous, huge, like revival, like big things.
Yeah,
Like we've just been kind of faithful and showing up and being diligent, answering the phone, getting up week after week, teaching, studying, counseling, and just doing that week after week after week, year after year after year. And it's like, I think if I really stop and I say, yeah, there's probably at least a handful of families, probably a handful of marriages that if it wasn't for me just sacrificing a little bit to do that would probably look different than they look today.
Sure.
And I kind of take pride in that, but then again, it's like I'm super cautious that I'm even doing that, because I'm like, it's really just, I honestly just feel like I'm Balaam's ass, and that's just it's just the bottom of.
Well, I think like there's a way that you can see all that and see the good things that God has done through your willingness to cooperate with Him, and have some like healthy pride in that. But also with that is like this great sobriety. And it's like two things. Number one, this is a massive responsibility that God has entrusted me with. And so I better not screw it up, right? I better live in holiness and righteousness and value confession and transparency and repentance and all that stuff. Like there's the first part of it. And then the second part is like, at any time, if I start to make this about me, every single piece of my involvement in this could be removed. Like God could humble me and He could do this through somebody else.
Yeah, it's like a healthy fear of it.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah.
When it's easy to fall prey, I think, as a leader to criticisms from people who are kind of on the periphery, or people that have kind of nominally been involved in your ministry or your church, and it's like they come in and then you handle a situation and then they turn around and just say, spew the most vitriolic stuff, like you did it wrong.
Yep.
And it's like, well, man, like maybe I did, and it's like you fall prey to all these thoughts and these doubts, and you're like, man, did I do it wrong? And it's like, well, I did the best I could. I prayed about it. I asked God for wisdom on it. I did the best I could. Right. And I'm like, you were here for like 2 months. I've been here trying to do this and just hold it together for like several years, and I just did the best I could. And you have to like kind of sometimes like a I don't know, just brush that stuff off sometimes. And I mean, it's good to hear that, because you always want to be open to criticism. You always want to be surrounded by people who don't think super highly of you. But at the same time, you're always a true leader is going to inevitably really, really annoy somebody and piss them off. And you're going to have to be like,
Yeah.
look, I'm sorry. That's the best I can do right now. And that's the call that I'm making. And it angers you. I know that. But yeah, I think I'm really prone to kind of put too much stock in people's criticism sometimes. As I'm maturing and getting older and more experienced, and I'm able to brush it off a little bit more. But
Yep.
yeah, it's tough though. It's really
yeah,
tough.
man. I heard this recently. I was listening to somebody give a talk about leadership, and they said leadership is disappointing your own people at a rate they can absorb.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And resilience is the ability to retain core purpose and integrity in the midst of dramatically changing circumstances.
Yeah. No, that's because leadership at its core is influencing people to do something they otherwise wouldn't do on their own.
Exactly. Yep.
So you're automatically stretching someone and pushing someone, or a good leader will at least push them beyond what they think they can or should do.
Well, and you're disrupting the status quo. Mm-hmm. If you're like doing what it is that God's called you to do, in the sense of you're encouraging people to be a disciple of Jesus that makes disciples of Jesus, and that sacrifices their lives, that lives on mission, that makes their life about taking up their cross every day and following Jesus. That's not natural. That's supernatural. So by default, if you're doing that faithfully, you're going to be a disruptor, and people are going to push back against that and say, no, I don't think this is the way that we need to go. Right.
Yeah.
And so I think that just being able to just say, you know what, this isn't really about me and my vision. This is about Christ's vision for life and for who we are to be as a church. And so, thank you. Thank you for that feedback. That helps, just to kind of know where you're at, and I'll receive that, and I'll think about that, and I'll pray about that. But at the end of the day, like, this is the direction we're going to go. Yeah. But I think God sends those people in our lives to keep us humble.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because when we start thinking, man, everybody loves me, then that's right when that email shows up, from people who hate us because we don't think the earth is flat. But anyway.
What do they say? Yeah, like a good leader surrounds him or herself with those who don't think highly of him, or
they're not impressed by you. Yeah,
they're not impressed by them. Yeah, that's the quote I'm looking for. It's like, that's really smart.
Yeah. Well, great question. Thank you, Sam.
I went off on a tangent on that, but
that was good.
Rabbit trail.
That's a good tangent. Mm-hmm. Okay, next question. Hey, Josh and Gabe, hope all is well. This is not a personal question, but just thought I wondered if it would be worth discussing on the podcast. In my understanding, the generally accepted Christian viewpoint is that for a marriage to be recognized as legitimate, it has to be licensed, conducted by an approved officiant, have witnesses, etc. Not just where you hear people use a phrase like, we're married in the eyes of the Lord. Mm-hmm. So with that in mind, does a divorce have to be legally recognized as well? Mm-hmm. For the purposes of discussion, I feel like to obviously needs to be divorced for a biblically approved reason. So it's like a biblically qualified reason, like adultery, or what Jesus gave us is that reason for divorce. Does all the paperwork have to be agreed upon by a judge before people should be moving on? I happen to know someone going through divorce currently where they have agreed to all terms now for quite some time, but still a good chunk of time until their court date for a judge to sign off on it. My gut reaction would be that it needs to be finalized, but I think the argument would be where you can go to the courthouse and get married officially on a whim, but you can't do that with a divorce. Also, should you move on in that time period? And can you act different? Okay. That's a very, very, very good question. And there's a second part. Secondly, would you consider a relationship that starts during the time between agreeing upon divorce and it being legalized one that has started under sinful pretense? So would that be adultery, I guess is what they're asking. Yeah. Would these couples be carrying a burden of unrepentant sin? Okay.
Sheesh.
Yeah.
It's a big one.
That is a big one. First of all, have you heard that whole argument? Well, we're married in God's eyes.
Yeah,
we're living together, sleeping together. We're married. We're basically married. We're married in God's eyes.
Yeah, it's common law in God's eyes. Yeah.
So
funny story. You were in my wedding. You sang music at my wedding as well, and you were one of the groomsmen. You pelted me with birdseed as I was
almost made you and your wife crash.
Yeah. So funny story is we drove straight to the port of Tampa, and we got
Mhm.
on a cruise, and we spent 7 days on a cruise. And spare you the details, we did what married people do, right? And
Mm.
then we got back from the cruise, and we went. We're loading up Stacy's stuff to move her into my apartment, and I found this Manila envelope.
Oh no.
Um, and there in the Manila envelope was our marriage license that we were supposed to drop in the mailbox
Oh
to
no.
be mailed to the courthouse, and we failed to do it for 7 days.
Uh-oh.
We were living in.
You guys were sinners.
We're
Oh my
fornicating. I mean,
goodness. You
no,
were
but
just
this.
fornicating. Yep. My goodness.
So I always tell that story because it's like, it's funny, and Stacey's always horrified when I tell that story. But were we married? Yeah, in God's eyes,
Yeah.
we were married. Like
Sure.
we had our pastor marry us. There was witnesses. There was all this stuff. We went through a biblical wedding ceremony, but the last thing we didn't do was just mail the piece of paper off to the courthouse and it be recognized by the state of Florida.
Yeah.
It didn't mean we weren't married. So I always tell people, yeah, that piece of paper doesn't make you married in God's eyes, but why wouldn't you just go ahead and get that piece of paper? It's going to give
Exactly.
you a lot of tax incentives and stuff like that.
Right.
But there are countries where, if you're not a certain denomination or a certain religion, your marriage will not be accepted or recognized by the government. And there are Christians who have to go through with a marriage, but according to that government, they're not married.
Oh, really?
Like I think actually Uganda is one of them. You have to be you have to be married by a Anglican priest.
No joke. I didn't know that.
Or some other, or maybe Catholic priest. There's certain like 2 or 3
Like a
denominations.
state-approved church for it to be a.
Yeah.
Oh, that's super
So
interesting.
people who are not part of those denominations, they can't get someone to marry them because they're not, full-blown Anglican or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So they'll get married by their local pastor, but they, according to the government of Uganda, they're not officially married. So yeah, I think in a situation like in the United States of America, it's good if the state will recognize your union that is sealed by God and by someone mediating it, by a cloud of witnesses. You should go ahead and get the paperwork. Why not?
Yeah.
But yeah, that doesn't make your marriage official.
Sure. Yeah. No, I think that like what would be constituted as a marriage is like the core essence of marriage is in the commitment made between these two people and God and their community, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So like in certain situations, like you said, cultural barriers, legal restrictions, okay, I can see that. But like the normative practice of marriage that you read all through the scriptures and all through 6,000 years of human history is marriage is a sincere commitment before God, witnessed by a community.
Mm-hmm.
And it is like publicly recognized these two people are married. They're giving all of their life to one another. This is marriage, right? Mm-hmm. So when people say we're married in God's eyes, I'm like, well, great. Go ahead and get married in the eyes of your community and the state. Like if you are, let's make it official, right? If you're really committed to each other, why would you not commit everything to each other?
Yeah.
So to me, I don't think that's not a good argument. So when it comes to divorce, that's where it becomes a little bit more,
case by case.
Yeah, I mean, from a legal standpoint, like divorce would involve the intervention of the civil authorities to finalize the marriage dissolving.
Mm-hmm.
So the Bible doesn't explicitly command you having to seek legal finalization, but it does encourage you to submit to governing authorities. That's Romans 13:1.
Yeah.
And it does command you to act with integrity and honesty. So I would think, this is just me taking a stab at it, if you are legally married through the state, then you need to be legally divorced through the state according to the laws of the land. Mm-hmm. If you genuinely have a biblical reason to be divorced. That's just my thought.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree with that. Someone came to me, a couple came to me and they said, hey, we want to get married. The problem is she's not legally divorced yet. Mm-hmm. Can you go ahead and officiate a ceremony for us, though? I would say,
hello,
let's pump
Joseph
the brakes.
Yeah.
Yeah, let me pump the brakes on this. Let's let's finalize this divorce. Let's talk about why the divorce is taking so long. Let's
Yes.
talk about what the other spouse is demanding of your desired spouse. Let's just lay it all out on the table, because it's not. I always say nothing done in a rush is of God.
Mm-hmm.
If you're truly, truly in love with one another, you could probably wait till all this dust kind of settles. And yeah, I mean, why would you want to be in a union with someone who has legal ties to someone who clearly
Right.
is at odds with them? That's going to create a big mess for your finances, for your potential home ownership, for
Right.
legality of children, and who has custody of. Man, if I would tell a couple, hey, just cool your jets. Let's let this
Mm-hmm.
dust settle. But yeah, that's really, really tough.
Well, and I found, and this is interesting too. For a number of years, divorce statistics were out of control in the U.S. They're cooling down a little bit, mainly because couples are getting married less and less, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But what was so interesting about the divorce statistics, and I can't remember where I read this, it might have been Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell. He may have talked about this in that book. But anyway, there's always exceptionalities that like skew statistics. So in the case of divorce rates, most of the time, the reason the divorce rate seems so absolutely ridiculous, like half of marriages in divorce and all that stuff, is because there's such a thing as a serial divorcer. Right? So there's such a thing as somebody that gets divorced, remarried, divorced, remarried, divorced, remarried. So they've been divorced and remarried 7 times. So if you look at like, okay, so there was, 6,000 marriage license issued in that county the past 5 years. Well, of that 6,000, 7 of them are to that one person, right? So, but I say all that to say, the people that usually want to get divorced and rush into a new marriage, statistically speaking, are going to get divorced again. Because your chances for getting divorced on your second and third marriage are somewhere in the neighborhood of like 70 and 80%. Because rushing into a new marriage doesn't fix the problems that were still there in the first marriage. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So if someone comes to me, and they have over the years, saying my divorce is like not yet finalized, or it just got finalized, I'm in love with this person, we want to get married tomorrow, I'm like, well, I'm not going to do your ceremony because I think that's a really dumb idea. For that reason. Like, you guys need to figure out what were the issues there in that first marriage that are still going to be there in the next, unless you get some help for it. So, I mean, the second part of that question this person asked is, okay, so if they're not legally divorced and yet they're not acting like they're divorced, they're divorced in God's eyes, if you will. They haven't, been in the same house or talked to each other 3 or 4 years. It's just the divorce hasn't happened. Is one of those people wrong for entering into a dating relationship in the midst of that?
I mean, there's the such thing as case by case, but I would say 9 times out of 10, yes. Here's the thing, like, if you got married, let's say you're living in one of these countries that don't recognize your marriage legally, but you did, biblically speaking, you had a very biblical marriage, but you didn't take it to the courthouse, so to speak. And then that marriage ends for whatever reason, and the elders, the pastor of the church that under the the authority that married you and mediated that covenant, they said, okay, yeah, that's a valid reason to end this marriage. The marriage is terminated. It's publicly declared terminated, whatever that looks like.
Right.
Then yeah, I think then that's potentially an opportunity to remarry. But in this sense, if you did legal paperwork with the courthouse, then unfortunately, yeah, there's still strings attached there to that other human being. I always say, divorce doesn't solve all the problems of a bad marriage. It solves some, but then it creates new ones.
Yep.
And so I'd want to know what new problems have been created now that I, as a potential spouse, have to help navigate through.
Yep. Yeah. So like
it's kind of like a landmine. It's a field of minefield. It's like you're walking through this. It's like, I want to know what this former spouse is. I want to know how they are still legally bound to you, in which ways. That's worth knowing.
Because like if your heart is you love God and you want to obey Jesus and you want to follow his commands, one of the commands of God that he gives to his people is you shouldn't commit adultery, or you shall not commit adultery. Not you shouldn't, like you're not going to. If you're my people, you're not going to, and you won't. Right? Yeah. And so like if you take that serious, there's going to be something in you that goes, man, I don't want to be guilty of breaking that command. God says not to commit adultery. Well, this person's still married technically. Yeah. So like there's something in you that says, man, I don't want to be guilty of that. Like I'm going to be very careful to just tap the brakes, to wait, and to make sure that this is done, this is finalized before I move into something new. And again, like Gabe has been saying, I mean, case by case, there's no one size fits all for these sorts of things. But I think generally speaking, for most of these, I would say you need to wait and make sure it's finalized, make sure it's done.
Yeah. And in fact, maybe I upgrade that to like in all cases, because I can't think of a scenario where in any state in the United States of America, I'm not familiar with all the state laws, but I can't think of a scenario where, given the proper amount of time and you jump through the proper protocols, where divorce can't be finalized.
Right.
There isn't I can't think of a state that would be like, oh, I'm sorry, unless we get this signature on all these terms, then your spouse you're going to be forever married to your spouse. Right. I don't think that's possible in the United States of America, but I could be wrong.
Yeah. I don't know.
But yeah, like in the state of Alabama, like given enough time and making enough public declarations via newspaper or whatever the case may be, it's like, yeah, that divorce will eventually be finalized. And therefore, I think you should wait for that divorce to be finalized before you get into a relationship with someone else.
Well, there was that movie, Sweet Home Alabama, with Reese Witherspoon. You remember that one?
Never seen it.
Yeah, and she's like some hotshot exec in New York or whatever, and she gets engaged in Tiffany's. You remember that? You remember that, Gabe? She gets engaged in Tiffany's. You remember, with a blue box?
No.
Yeah, she does. And so then it turns out that she's still married, and her husband that she's like estranged from lives in Alabama, so she has to go back to Alabama to legalize the divorce. Yeah, Alabama, the state you live in. I would think everyone would have to watch this movie and she goes back, and he's like, I ain't signing it. And so she's there to make him sign it. And then who's
the prior husband? She falls back in love with him or something?
Yeah, I don't know who plays. Let's look it up on IMDb. It's not Matthew McConaughey.
Yeah, but it's someone like him.
It is. It's someone that has the like, all right.
I think I have seen that.
Isn't it terrible that Josh Lucas.
And he's the former spouse.
He's a poor man's rom-com. Matthew McConaughey. Yeah, what a terrible movie. I think I saw that on a plane one time. It was either stare out the window, I'm flying over the Atlantic Ocean, or watch Sweet Home Alabama, because this is before the days of like you could pick the movie you wanted to watch. They would just show one movie. So I think that's how I saw that.
The Alibaba Matthew McConaughey, or the Wayfair.com Matthew McConaughey.
Yeah, he's kind of like Walmart Matthew McConaughey, It's like we can't get Matthew McConaughey.
Great value.
But we've got the great value version, the Dr. Thunder version.
The Sam's Club,
yeah. So anyway.
Lord, help us.
Help us all. Okay, next question. We don't have to spend a ton of time on this because this is more of just a reference point. Hey, Gabe.
You're rushing me then? Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm not rushing you. I'm just saying. Hey, Gabe. And hey, Josh. That hurts.
I like how you're in parentheses. Yeah. Hey, Josh.
Might you have a service recorded for your congregation of a communion service? I'd love to hear your messianic perspective on this Passover connected remembrance.
Yeah. So we did a whole episode, one of our first, if not our very first, on the Passover connection. You can go back and listen to that, where I, talked
episode 1
about Passover. Was it our first one?
It was the first one. Yep.
Okay. Yeah. So you can go back and listen to that. And, so I'm going to spare you all those details. You can go back and do your homework on that one, I guess. But basically we don't have like a typical, what you would call communion service, where some churches is every week, some churches once a month or whatever. We celebrate Passover on an annual basis. The week before Passover, however, we're super weird. We actually do foot washing. We have husbands and fathers wash the feet of their wives and children in the congregation. We have
Wow.
the elders and the deacons wash male elders, or yeah, like, which we're all male, but
Mm-hmm.
male deacons wash husbands and fathers' feet, and then they turn around and wash their families' feet. We just spend the entire service. We have live praise and worship music playing, and we just do foot washing. Then the following week is Passover, and we do this kind of in kind of fulfillment when Jesus says, basically, you see what I'm doing by washing your feet. I want you to do this as well. So we do that, and then we celebrate Passover, and we, that's kind of in essence the Lord's Supper. That was his last supper with us before his crucifixion. And we tie every aspect of Passover is pointing to his ultimate sacrifice on the cross, and everything is very messianic oriented. It's all pointing to him, and so we kind of illuminate all of that through the Passover Seder. We've been alternating, just to give you kind of a summary of what we do. Sometimes we do a big community Seder. We have everybody and their family come, and we host a big banquet, and celebrate Passover together as a meal. And this year, however, we're doing it back in homes, where the week prior to Passover, I'll actually be teaching. 2 weeks prior to Passover, I'll be teaching how to do a Passover Seder in your home. And then Passover will be on the 22nd of this month, and people will gather in their homes and invite people into their homes, and they'll be doing it there. So yeah, that's kind of, we don't really do communion per se, but Passover to us is communion. So we kind of do, but it's on an annual basis. Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then and again, back to that Passover episode we did. Every aspect of the Seder dinner would have a messianic connection to it. And so when Jesus takes the bread and he takes the cup, that's very, very, very significant. Just when you connect it to everything else happening in the Passover meal. So,
yeah,
very cool. All right. Well, last question. Okay. This person says, I've read the book Boundaries a couple of times before, and I'd like to hear your takes on setting those boundaries with others as believers in Christ. We are called to love our neighbor, turn the other cheek, have a servant's heart, and forgive when offended over and over. We are to die to self in so many ways. Sometimes it's difficult to know when to set boundaries with those around us, and maybe even other believers in the faith. It has often felt impolite or even hateful to set boundaries with people, since there's often times hurt or anger present when I needed to put them in place. As the book says, it's a tough topic to begin with, though in major people-pleasing tendencies or a family history of dysfunction in the mix, and you've got a recipe for a twisted idea on the subject. Boy, do we desperately need God's wisdom. And yes, this is a fantastic question. And man, I'm so glad this person sent this in, because I feel like I hear that book mentioned all the time, and I'm a big fan of it. But I think, like anything else, sometimes people can twist it and misunderstand it and take it to mean probably something different than it actually does in how they apply it. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah.
So what I mean by that is, I think people can sometimes, like, I'm really careful because I'm on really thin ice here talking about this, so please hear me. And I don't mean this for everybody, but this is just my experience as a pastor. I think people read the book Boundaries, or they hear people talking about boundaries, and what happens is people use that as a reason to never seek reconciliation or forgiveness at all from anybody, and so they're completely disowning family members and saying, I don't have space for toxic people in my life ever again. When it could be that, like, maybe you should set a better boundary, but you don't have the, like, emotional maturity to actually have a face-to-face conversation. So you're going to send out a passive-aggressive text and then block their number, and you're going to say that you're setting boundaries. And I just feel like that's not what the book is saying. And I feel like that's a very self-centered, lazy way to apply it. Am I out of turn as I'm saying this? What do you think?
No, I think, like anything, people can take things, out of context and take them to an extreme that shouldn't be taken to.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think the book has likely done more good than bad.
100%, 100%.
Yeah.
Fantastic book. You should read it. Great book. Great book. So
Mm.
I think like it depends on where somebody's at when they read it, right? Because I think some people, like it sounds like the person who sends this email struggles with not setting boundaries, right? Like
Yeah. Yeah.
feeling overly responsible for other people's feelings, or struggling with people pleasing, or like letting other people kind of come in and emotionally dump on them and stuff like that. And so we got to remind ourselves that like Jesus practiced boundaries, right? Like Luke 5:16, he withdrew often to pray and recharge. Matthew 23:13-36, he confronted wrongdoing. And he did that many times in his ministry. Like he would set boundaries with people and say, hey, like, no, that's wrong. You shouldn't do that. And John 5:30 talks about Jesus prioritizing his relationship with his heavenly Father above everything. But not only that, like Jesus, although he loved everybody and he's Jesus, he loves everybody, but not everybody had the same level of access to him. So he devoted his attention first and foremost to his top 3 disciples, then 12 disciples, and then 72 disciples.
Yeah.
So like Jesus doesn't make this attempt for everybody in the multitude to have all of him all the time, and to anyone who comes demanding for it, right? Like I don't know if about you, but that's like super encouraging as a pastor to know, like, well, Jesus had some boundaries, right? Yeah. Like that's encouraging, right? And then there's this really interesting verse, and Gabe, I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on this verse. John 2:23-24. Now, while he was in Jerusalem at the Passover festival, many people saw the signs he was performing and believed in his name. But Jesus would not entrust himself to them, for he knew all people. So I think that verse is in some way talking about Jesus and boundaries. In the sense that like all these people come and they have these verbal professions of belief, but Jesus kind of knows the track record of Israel.
Yeah.
And he knows the track record of humanity. And so even though he's like, yeah, come hear me teach, come see me do miracles, he doesn't entrust himself to them.
Yeah. Yeah. It could be speaking to like his concern that they would maybe prematurely exalt him as a king that would overthrow the Romans or something, Yeah. It's like, I think it's really good for ministerial leaders, especially, to have boundaries. I've seen people in my own life who have not had boundaries, and they lose sight of the aspects of their life that are much greater priority than people who they're trying to shepherd or lead and teach. And if you, ministerial leader in whatever capacity, who is listening to my voice right now, you set realistic boundaries with the people who are under your spiritual care, and there's someone who scoffs at that, they're not looking out for your best interest.
Yeah.
If you say, hey, I'd like to take off this weekend I'm going to take off and go out of town for my anniversary. If you get any kind of grief for that, that's not healthy behavior. Be encouraged, and just know that you need to set boundaries in your life. You need to spend time with people who are closest to you so that you can recharge and invest in them. But yeah, I think it's important, I think, to whoever asked this question, surround yourself with several wise people that have a good kind of you look at the wake of their lives and their relationships, and you see a lot of functionality, you see a lot of peace, and not a lot of like turmoil. Surround yourself with people like that, and then bounce things off of them and say, hey, I've got this cousin who's always hitting me up for like $100 here and $100 there. And I send it to him, but it's just doesn't seem like they're getting out of that financial rut. What would you do in my scenario? And they'll probably say, you know what, you need to stop. That's not normal.
Yeah.
Or I got this aunt who's always calling me. She wants to talk on the phone with me for 2 hours and complain about her husband. Okay, bounce it off of them. Hey, that's not good. Don't do that. Spend time. Right. She's taking you away from your family in the evening or whatever. She's emotionally leeching off of you like a parasite. You need to cut that off. If you surround yourself with like several people, 2, 3, 4, 5 people that you can, kind of leave names out, obviously, but like just go to them and say, hey, got this going on in my life. What would you do? then they can actually speak and help affirm those boundaries that you need to be setting in your life, and say, I would dial that back a little bit. We don't need to be doing that. So,
Well, Proverbs 13:20 says, "Whoever walks with the wise will become wise, but the companion of fools will suffer harm."
Yeah.
Right. So what that means, I think, is that you can guard and maintain healthy relationships. Doesn't mean you're supposed to hate fools and say, "I'm never going to have anything to do with you. I'm going to cut you out of my life altogether."
Right.
But you can set that boundary. Just say, "Hey, I'm not going to be your companion because I'm going to suffer harm." Right.
Yeah.
So the Jesus way is loving our enemies, turning the other cheek, all that stuff. But there also is within that the wisdom of saying, "You're a fool." Not to say that to that person to their face, but observing the behavior and saying, "Man, this is what the Bible says is foolishness." And if I let this person in and give them complete, unfettered access to every part of my life, I'm going to suffer harm in some way, and that's not wise.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and it's actually a loving thing to do to dial back and set boundaries with that person.
Yeah, I had somebody tell me this yesterday, and I thought this was brilliant. They said that boundaries are like a house, in that the house is different levels of intimacy in relationships from people. So you might have people that might just be front porch people, right? So you're kind of front porch people, but you're probably not going to let them into your kitchen, right? You've got people that may come into your dining room and have dinner with you, but they're probably not going to come back into your bedroom, right?
Right. Yeah.
And maybe there's people that you let into your, the foyer where you sit and you chat and you talk, and then they head on their way. And it's kind of like that with setting proper boundaries. That maybe there's some people in your life, like a really toxic family member, and they're a front porch person. Like, you're kind to them, you're nice to them, you see them a couple times a year at holidays, but beyond that, man, you're it's probably not good for you or them to let them into the innermost part of your house and in your life. And just kind of being wise about that. And I think that's so important for you to what you brought up about having somebody wise to kind of bounce that off of. But I think Ephesians 4:15 talks about speaking the truth in love. I think open and honest communication is really essential to be able to say to somebody in a kind but assertive way, "Hey, listen, I don't think it's right for me to be hearing you talk bad about your husband on the phone. I don't think I'm the guy that you need to be talking about that with. You probably need to go get some marriage counseling. And I just don't feel like that's me that needs to be that person." Right? Yeah. But a passive aggressive text message, right? That's not the way to do it.
Or just ignoring their phone calls.
Yeah, just ignoring their phone calls. Probably not how to do it, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I think consistency is really important too. Recognizing your limitations is really important. Being somebody who is gracious and forgiving, super important. But you also know that being a gracious and forgiving person doesn't mean that you're turning a blind eye towards evil, and you're not holding somebody accountable for their actions. Right. That's not what it means to be gracious and forgiving. The only people that guilt trip Christians for, "Well, I thought Christians were supposed to be nice all the time," are usually people trespassing boundaries, right?
Yeah.
It's your cousin that's asking you for $500 so they can make bail, and you're like, "No, I'm not going to do that." "Well, I thought Christians were supposed to be generous. I'm sorry. Yeah. I thought people love Jesus were generous." I don't know why he talks like that, but
yeah.
Thanks for Alabama.
The extent to which someone respects or disrespects your personal boundaries is the extent to which you should worry about offending them when you speak truth to them in love. That's what I like to say, because it's sometimes we get so paranoid about offending someone if we're going to speak the truth to them in love. But meanwhile, they're just absolutely trashing your own personal boundaries and your personal space or your time. And it's there's a proportionate relationship there we should keep in mind.
Yeah.
Again, speak the truth in love, but
right.
You have to, like you said, you have to speak it.
Well, and you can love someone and be respectful and honorable towards that person from afar.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to let them into your bedroom. You can show them love and keep them out on your front porch.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah. And look, hey, if someone is like your Aunt Susie, who's talking to you for 2 hours every evening, is greatly offended, because you say, hey, I'd like to just maybe do this once a week, and maybe just 1 hour a week. I'm kind of getting behind on spending time with my family or getting ready for my next work day. If she's greatly offended at that, there's your sign, I guess, that maybe, yeah.
No. Yeah, and it's not an
Fill in the
actual,
blank.
it's not a reciprocal relationship if you can't speak truth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right? If you can't say to that
It's a
person,
parasitic one, yeah.
exactly. If you can't say to that person, hey, listen, like I'm really struggling and it's really hard for me to, talk on the phone as much as we're talking, or when you do that, like if you feel like you can't say that without that person freaking out and being manipulative or whatever, then man, it's really not a strong relationship. It's not a healthy or functional relationship. It's a dysfunctional, and like you said, a parasitic one. And so
you're enabling their parasitism.
Yeah,
I think, but if they come back and say like, hey, oh man, I'm so sorry, I didn't realize that. I'm so sorry. Yeah, whatever time you can grant me that, I would appreciate that. That's something you can work with there.
100%. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. But you can be kind and Christ-like and honorable in setting a boundary. It doesn't always have to look like you doing the TikTok influencer thing where you just cut out negative people from your life and you have a list of people you're not talking to, right? And I think that's what concerns me, because I sit with people all the time, especially people like my parents' generation, that will just tell me like it's not an uncommon thing. I have adult children that just refuse to talk to me anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And my wife is a hospice nurse. She sees that all the time too.
Yeah.
Like somebody's on their deathbed dying and there's an adult child that's refusing to talk to them. And sometimes it's for like a good, understandable reason. But a lot of times it's not. A lot of times it's just like what pop psychology is happening right now is you got to cut negative, toxic people out of your life. And so then we're the ones that get to define what that is, right?
Remember the trend on Facebook? It still happens from time to time where it's like, I'm purging my Facebook friends.
Yeah,
comment
exactly.
Here. If you want to stay one of my friends.
Yeah, make sure you comment, right? People are like, no, please don't delete me, right? Yeah, so I don't know, man. I just think there's a balance. I feel like, it talks about in the last days, Paul warns Timothy, says in the last days, people will be lovers of self. And then one of the things is they'll be disrespectful and disobedient to parents.
Yeah.
And so I don't know. I just feel like it's such a trend right now. I see it all the time. People having these long lists of people they're never going to speak to again. And there's just a part of it that just goes, man, I just don't feel like that's the same as setting boundaries. Like it might be that eventually for somebody that's horrible to you, but most of the time, like you can still honor them and respect them and love them at a distance. But I don't know. Maybe I'll get hate mail for that. But anyway, that's just me. So
yeah.
Well, 100 episodes in the book.
Yeah.
It'll be 100, 101 next time. So, yeah. You want to say anything for posterity?
No, just say if you are friends with me on Facebook, and you want to stay friends with me on Facebook, then I need you to. I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
No, thank you guys.
Go
for
comment and like her.
Yeah. Thank you all for listening to 100 episodes. I wonder if there's anyone listening right now who is like a completionist. Is that a thing where they listen to all the episodes? I wonder if there's anyone out there who's done that. If so, I'm so sorry. Yeah,
that's a terrifying prospect if they listen to every single one. But yeah, if you are, send us a email. We'll send you like a Bennigan's gift card or something. If they're still around, I don't know. Yeah. So yeah, rest in peace, Bennigan's. Alrighty. Well, thank you guys for listening. Thank you for the awesome questions to those who sent them in. And if you got any more, send them in as always. beersandbiblepodcast@gmail.com. Thanks for listening. We'll see you guys next time.